All right, good morning, everyone. TGTME is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, and video game industries. Of course, I'm your host, Kurt. We're on episode 316, joined today by a past guest who was one of the actual original guests that we had on the show way back when, almost 5 years ago. You may remember him from Mysteries of the Arcana with his beautiful and amazing artwork from the first couple of chapters, and he is now doing his own work for Silver City. We are joined today by Keith Wood. How you doing today, Keith?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing, Kurt?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. It's been too long, you know. You go off, you do your own little thing here and there, and it's good to have you finally back on the show. Let's talk about your actual new graphic novel or comic that's coming out. Now, this is going to be print only, or is this going to be an online base?
I'm still discussing with them the possibility of a web-based teaser, the first issue being available online for free to kind of help generate interest. But right now that's still kind of in discussion. As far as the book goes, it's supposed to be coming out next March. It's going to be 12 months, one issue a month, standard comic book format, and we should actually be able to. I'll actually should have a link for ordering that when it's ready to go too.
And I guess we should actually say what the comic is itself, if I didn't quite mention it in the intro. It's of course Silver City, but tell us what Silver City is all about.
Silver City started as a concept because I kind of fell out of love with the superhero genre a long time ago, and I swore up and down I would never do a superhero comic because my interests leaned more into science fiction and fantasy. And what happened was I was like trying to go to sleep one night, and this idea popped in my head, and it was the idea of motivation, and what drives a person to become a superhero or a hero in general, whether it's a situation or an overbearing setup of circumstance. And I decided that I wanted to create a collection of characters who, because of circumstance, wound up in a position where they were publicly lauded as superheroes. That may not necessarily constantly be the case. The story itself is actually told from the perspective of a character named Charlie Monroe. And let me back up a second. I'm about to run myself over here, putting the cart before the horse. What it is it takes the idea of our world as it is today, where superheroes are an idea that exists only in popular media. It's the complete fiction. And then it becomes a reality that we are not prepared for. So the question of motive is brought up on multiple levels. You have government involvement. They want to know who these people are, where they come from, what do they want, So there's a very deep involvement of the government in it. It's not just, oh, well, they saved some people, they must be okay. They really want to know what's going on. Though it's happening at a global scale, which does get dealt with in the story a little bit, the main focus is this one city. And I took a lot of interesting notes from this where the superheroes are not self-titled. They end up with their own names as given to them by popular media. So a lot of the heroes don't refer to themselves by the names that they're given, which I thought was kind of a neat idea. So you have these characters, and it's very regional because different cities, different locations have different naming conventions for their heroes. And, for example, Silver City actually has a very Greek theme. You have Athena, Hercules, Icarus, and a bunch of, and that's what the media calls them based on, just what they see. But I also wanted to create a group of heroes that you didn't necessarily want to be because the life they have kind of sucks. Because there's this overbearing amount of responsibility. Like Charlie is Athena. He's the first introduction of how bad things are, because he has no control over his power. The only warning he has is he becomes violently ill before he becomes her, and he has no control over when it happens or how long it lasts. But when he's Charlie, he's just like you and me. He's vulnerable. He gets hungry. He can be hurt. He can be killed. So it becomes incredibly important for him to hide who he is. But because he has no control over when it happens, at the same time, he's also very reclusive, very antisocial. He doesn't have a regular job. He doesn't have very many friends, and he's an alcoholic. But when he's her, super strength, flight, invulnerable, all these things, but he's still him. And there's a lot of things that are dealt with in that too. And I started developing just this cast of characters that just have these really terrible things happening to them that lead up to them becoming this group of heroes. There's only one self-named hero in the story, and he calls himself the Vagabond, and he shows up later on, and he actually is my idea of what Superman always should have been, kind of. There's an upper cap to everything he can do. Like, he can't fly, but he can jump really high, really far. He can pick up a car, but it takes effort. If he gets shot, bullets bruise him. So I just thought it was going to be nice. Then he calls himself the Vagabond because he has no place he settles, which is how he winds up in Silver City. And go ahead. Sorry.
At least he wasn't called the Drifter,
Yeah. But I built a lot of these, and a lot of these characters have a lot of dark history to them. So I wanted to handle them in a very realistic way. So you have characters who bear a lot of emotional and psychological scars. Charlie's been switching back and forth between himself and her ever since he was in his mid-teens. But it never became a profound and pronounced thing until later on in his early adult life when he acts, he changes and he ends up saving somebody. There's no costume involved or anything like that, but he saves somebody of some importance, and that's what kind of elevates him to this status, and he becomes kind of the pinnacle role model of what a hero should be through the course of his actions afterward. Simultaneously, I wanted to kind of do away with some of the what is the word I'm looking for? The unrealistic stereotypes that are presented in superhero comics. One of the things, like Athena's outfit is not this overly sexualized thing. It's a very practical, get up, very militaristic. The only exception I made is the fact that it has no sleeves. So you get to kind of see her musculature and her arms and everything because they're bared. But outside of that, I wanted to keep it very, very straightforward, very, practical in the design elements first. I think that answered the question.
Yeah, no, that was good, actually. No, it's good to see. And I wonder if, obviously when you have the superheroes, obviously you're going to, well, every superhero has to have a supervillain or a nemesis of some kind. I mean, are you pulling that trope as well?
There is a little bit of that, but there's also a history to that. Like I said, keeping with the Greek theme, the underworld villain, and there is a deliberate choice in this, and this is the only character who actually readily accepts the name given to him as Hades,
of course,
Lord of the Underworld. And he actually has history with Charlie, but with everything that's on up and coming in the story, with how things lay out with Charlie, and there's another kid named Kyle who actually is tied into this. He's actually the mechanic that introduces Icarus, but I can't detail that too much without spoiling it. But these characters all have to come together to deal with Hades and what he's got going on. But he's another one of these characters who has wound up with, powers, and his history of what made him this way actually has to do with Charlie when they were kids, even though him and Charlie don't know they don't know that they're each other yet. So it goes from being this overarching tropey fight to a very personal conflict between these two characters.
Interesting. How long have you been writing this world and getting things put together for this? Because it sounds like you put a heck of a lot of thought into it, which is good, because I'm interested.
Oh, I started working on the idea probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, and it was more a lot of just getting the ideas down and shaping the world and this city and the environment that it's in. And that's actually was what benefited me in working on finding someone who wanted to publish it, because once I had enough of it together, I was able to sit down and do some FaceTime with a few different people, and I ended up getting chased around for nearly 8 months by Blue Collar Vigilante Studios, which actually branched off and created another publishing group called Netherworld Comics. And what it was basically they were like, we want to publish this idea. We want to publish this idea. And I was like, I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to dive into it yet, because I wasn't quite ready, and I knew it wasn't ready. And finally, right around the end of December, early part of January, they gave me a 12 issue offer distributed through Diamond and everything. And I was like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, so it's good to hold out.
Sometimes, yes.
With all of your other work that you've done, when it comes to, seeing your artwork in the past, Mysteries of the Arcana, with the Lavenders, with now Silver City, obviously your artwork has greatly improved in the amount of years that I've seen.
Well, thank you.
And you're having fun with it too. That's I think the ultimate goal of being an artist. But when it comes to these new characters, are you drawing back from past characters you've drawn in terms of either stylistically or writing wise?
Well, I wanted to give the book its own kind of feel, so I'm pushing a little bit further away from kind of where I started with Mystery Arcana. The characters are a little less, I guess, fusion manga-ish. But there's still hints of that, little elements of that, where their eyes are just a little bit bigger than they should be. But I still wanted to keep things closer to better proportions. I still got the slightly bigger heads, but it's not so overblown that it distracts from the gravitas of the story elements. And that was something that I really wanted to lean toward, and something I really wanted to build into it was a bit more detailing with both the color and texture, because it is going to be a color book. I wanted to add a little more what is it? A little more tone variation to give a little more life to the illustrations. So there's subtle tone variations in face and skin tones, stuff like that gives it a little more depth visually. Kind of gives it that sense of being alive, as opposed to, if you look at my Mystery Arcana stuff, a lot of my characters were very like single toned, even though there was a lot of shading that was involved, like a skin tone, and was comprised of one color and then shaded from there. I'm doing a lot more with adding, subtle tone variations, adding a little bit of red to the nose and the cheeks, a little bit, to add that little bit of life to the visuals that gives it a little more punch.
And that's good. I mean, you're pushing your own personal boundaries when it comes to your art style, and I think that's necessary, especially for, the amount of books you're going to have to put out, as well as the world too.
Yeah, I'm hoping it goes over well. When I first did the first promo piece that went to C2E2 back in April, there was a lot of concept sketching, and I think they were slightly surprised that it didn't go with something a little more actiony. So what we have is Athena standing on a rooftop, which I know you've seen the piece, but she's standing on a rooftop, and there's a clock tower behind her, and it's very straightforward, very simple. And the question is, of course, the tagline is, what drives you? Because, like I said, that's a very big overarching issue in the entire storyline is motivation. Whether it be the good guys, the bad guys, government asking questions, it's a very big question, because I think it's a very important question that's never really dealt with, aside from in a few, small cases, Spider-Man being a good one. What drove him to be a superhero? And I always liked Spider-Man as far as that went. He actually had a seated moral core that is his driving motivation to use his powers to help others. But I wanted to beg that question a little deeper with these characters, because each character has a more specific reason for why they do what they do.
Is there a reason why you're going a little more psychological in this type of world than you have in the past?
Well, I've often thought, and this is looking at movies and things, I find there are usually two types of entertainment that come out. You either have entertainment that treats its audience like they're stupid. Like, okay, I'm going to spell everything out for you just to be sure that you're here and everything makes sense all the way from start to finish. And I thought it was more interesting instead to approach the audience intelligently and say, I'm going to make you think. So I tell us, I want to tell a story that makes you, I don't spell everything out. There's this layering of plot upon plot. So you have, a lot of thick questions, and not all of them are going to be answered directly. You're going to have to look at the information given and draw your own conclusions.
I think that's a great way to tell a story, especially when it comes to this aspect, comic-wise, because I think there's very few comics, and I'm talking more from the community itself rather than the mainstream comics, that are actually causing people to say, well, wait a second, this isn't what I'm normally used to.
Right.
I'm glad to see that Silver City is going to be one of them as well. What about mainstream comics? Besides Spider-Man, are there any other mainstream comics that you looked at that are either similar in terms of making you think?
Well, I think it falls out of the comic category, but comic-based that kind of sparks this. And it has to do with a lot of the comic movies that are being made. Like I recently saw Man of Steel, for example, and Iron Man 3, the Avengers, a lot of those fall into that category where they're approaching the material in a smart way. Now, I know Man of Steel, a lot of people got very, very aggravated over the I'm not going to spoil anything, but there was a very controversial moment in the movie, and a lot of people got mad about it. But at the same time, there was a lot of questions raised in the movie that make you start to question motivation, and that's another one. Is another one that does it. But one of my favorites, and this is both in movie form and graphic novel form, as far as that approaches from that perspective, is The Watchmen. It's a very, very potent story. The idea of what happens when you have a group of people who are kind of appointed judge, jury, and executioner because of the abilities they possess. How do you govern that? And I liked that idea when Alan Moore presented it, way back, and still reading through, and it still holds up. It's got a good weight to it, a good question that you're left with no direct answer to by the end of the reading or the end of the movie, that you really have to kind of turn it onto yourself and go, well, how would you handle that? And then of course their way in The Watchmen is the introduction of the Keene Act, which forced all superheroes to unmask and basically cease and desist.
Yeah, no, I remember. I've never actually read the comic, but I saw the movie, and it was one of those where you didn't have to know the characters to understand the dynamics that everyone went through.
Right. Now, that actually is another thing that I thought was interesting about The Watchmen, if I'm going to tie these two together into a bow in a second, but you're given an implied history of these characters. You're not given a great deal of background on this, aside from little bits and pieces of exposition throughout the story. And it gives enough of a whole picture that you don't need to, have read anything that would have taken place prior. You get an idea of the camaraderie that some of these characters have, the history between them, the emotions tied into it. But it starts you at a point after all of that, and it works just fine. The thing that the Watchmen really presented that I really liked, and an idea that Silver City kind of takes from in a way, is I'm not going to give an explanation for the origin of powers and where these people get their abilities. I think there's an overwhelming flood and desire to explain, in comics, that this is why this person can do this. And I don't think that's necessary, particularly for this type of story, that it makes it a stronger, more compelling issue in the mystery and what's the other word I'm looking for here? But in the question surrounding why this happened, even though it is a continuing question, government really wants to know why, whatever, it's not so important that I'm going to tell you.
It's more of they have powers, deal with it.
Right. And I like that approach to storytelling. It's like magic, deal with it, and that's the kind of the mentality I approached this idea with. I didn't want it to become, bitten by a radioactive spider, came from another planet, has lots of money and technology. I didn't want it to be that kind of an issue. Though there is one character who does have lots of money and technology, but that's a side point.
Parents weren't killed. No, they're still alive in Florida.
Yeah, they're on the farm.
Darn it, I just merged Batman with Superman. What am I going to do?
Yeah. But that was also something I wanted to avoid. I wanted to avoid the Batman syndrome, too. That was something, because, you have Marvel, you had, and this is something a lot of people don't correlate. A lot of people will correlate Iron Man to Batman in a way. But Marvel had their own version of Batman, which was Moon Knight. He was basically, Batman in white. That's what it boiled down to. It was almost the same character and concept. But yeah, I wanted to avoid that. I wanted to look at the idea of surrounding an environment like, back to Charlie for a second, because Charlie, like I said, he is the one telling the story. It's almost entirely told from his perspective. And a lot of, the only time that it isn't is when there's a kind of a third person omniscient view that gives us a group of information about other things that are going on. But other than that, when we're seeing everything else, it's basically through Charlie's eyes. Because I wanted to create a character who's in a situation he can't really control, but he's making the best out of it, because that makes him relatable. Because we go through that, you end up in a situation that you feel completely helpless, but you do your best to make the best out of it. And this is just a more extreme version of that. But as he's telling the story, I wanted to take into account, a lot of even the history you don't see is everything from the way he was raised, the core set of values he was given. And that's going to play a big role in how he reacts to things. If there's a hostage situation going on downtown at the bank, a lot of how he's going to react to it is going to be very human in response, as opposed to, I'm just going to waltz in here because bullets bounce off of me. He's going to have a very human response to that before he goes marching in or doing whatever he needs to do to help out.
But if he can't control his power, I mean, the randomness aspect of, hey, I'm just going to go to the bank and bam, you're shot. Oh, well, that sucks.
Right. Like I said, the only thing he has going for him, sort of, is the fact that he has that warning sign before it happens, before he changes and before he changes back. And I thought that was the most just phenomenally just enticing ideas, was the fact that it causes him discomfort to become this hero character. I will say this. I had started to go in a really questionable direction with the idea at one point, where I was thinking about once a month he loses one power. And I decided that was taking it out of the depth that I wanted. And I was just like, it's funny, but I wasn't really going for funny when I started this, so scrap that. Oh, which God. Is an interesting argument, because you can take an idea and completely just destroy it like that, because you just keep going, well, I got this really good idea, we'll just tack this on here. And I think a lot of media does that, where it becomes oversaturated with too many good ideas to the point to where it becomes ridiculous.
That's how comedies are made.
This is true. But it's something that I actually had a discussion with a friend of mine, because I dabble in film and stuff too, and we were playing with a visual effect. And we kept trying to blend it, make it look cool and make it look neat. And there was a moment where we kept pushing and we stopped and we go, okay, that's too far. Let's bring it back a bit. And I think you really want to do that when you have a creative idea. You want to push it and push it and push it and examine it, and then find that too far and then pull back from that. And that was kind of what I started to go with. Like I said, there, it was like, okay, that's too far. Let's back off a little bit and keep it in this serious realm here. And I think it's really added a lot of weight to the story. And I have, from my own writing perspective, this is, of course, my first independent project of my own, as opposed to, working on art for someone else's story. And I think doing some screenwriting actually helped me a fair bit in building structure. When I was working on a film project with a couple of friends, we started to build this world. And the first thing we did was we said, who are the bad guys and why are they bad? Once again, you'll notice motivation is kind of a thing here because it's important. Even when you're dealing in the simplest of terms in a story that has nothing to do with superheroes or villains, motivation becomes a very key element in protagonists and antagonists. So that's what we started with, was who is the bad guy, or who are the bad guys, and why is that bad? What are they after? And we said, no evil for the sake of evil. There needs to be a reason. So once we had that, we backed up and we said, okay, now who are our good guys? Who are our protagonists? And why these people? And that was something that we started to build. And that's the same kind of mentality I approached Silver City with when I started building the world. I said, okay, who are our major players? Why are they involved in the manner that they are? And what do they want? And that's actually a big question with several of the characters. I'm going to go ahead and I'll give you Kyle and one other character. Like I said, Kyle is the key to Icarus, but that's kind of its own little surprise in the story. But there's another girl named Katie. Katie is actually locked up in a mental institution because she's crazy, except she's not. There are actually two other beings that live in her mind. They actually are capable of manifesting physically. However, she is their physical anchor. And when they are all out, she ages for all of them. So she ages 3 times faster. But the fact that they exist in her head as two other entities that she talks to has led to her being locked up. But they reach a point to where they have no choice, but they have to come out. And, there's a lot of pieces like that, and the argument of greater good comes into that one, where how do you define when it's okay to put one person at risk to save others, stuff like that. And like I said, a lot of these interesting questions cropped up while I was working on these stories. It's like, well, if she's locked up in a mental institution, at least she's being taken care of. These people are, they're not worried about what's going to happen to her. They're staying inside her head. Then she's not aging for everybody. And she'll be fine. It's just, she's being taken care of. At what point do you override that sense of security to do something for somebody else? And that's what I thought was an interesting question for those characters. And so, like I said, so I just built this whole idea around all of this, and I ended up conjuring, with the help of a friend, something we called the sidekick power.
The sidekick power?
That's where Hercules comes from. And Hercules, the character in the story, is actually never the same person, though they always functionally look the same. And once the link is made, you realize that the fact that this character exists as a hero running around saving things has to do with another character entirely. And that's how his power works. His power doesn't affect himself. It affects someone near him and turns them into this person. And I thought that was a neat idea. So we dubbed that the sidekick power.
I'll save you. Well, no, I won't, but this guy will.
Right. But I thought it was an interesting idea to create, a group of powers and setups and things that were different, and also not to overload a character with powers. I think our one exception being Athena, who actually has, basically the trifecta of superhero powers, super strength, flight, super speed.
Invulnerability.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Super speed kind of falls into the super flight thing-ish. But yeah, invulnerability, the trifecta of basic powers you get when you build an ideal superhero. But I wanted to also get rid of things like capes because functionally they're dangerous. You know, the Incredibles covered that one really well.
No capes.
Yes, no capes. And I went ahead and I gave Athena one extra power, and that's telekinesis. And I wanted to mix the telekinesis and super strength into kind of an idea of the two powers functionally working off of each other. And that was kind of where I drew the line. I said, okay, because if I'm going to work on this idea of introducing multiple superheroes who have to work together, I want to make sure that they also all have roles. Because it's like, if you look at Justice League, for example, you've got, you know, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, you know, John Jones, you know, Martian Manhunter, and then you got Cyborg. It's like Cyborg has a big gun. With this group of people, he's kind of useless. You know, and that was, you know, because you got, you know, Superman, Wonder Woman, you got Power Girl, all these characters, and I'm like, you know, he's out of place. You know, you've got this overload of all this super strength and all these powers that they possess. He's useless. You know, they don't write him that way, but I mean, if you look at it from a practical viewpoint, he kind of is.
But he gets those vending machines working so well.
Right. But I wanted to create a group of characters who can actually play off of each other. And I think the Avengers movie showed a really good example of that. The right blending of the powers of the characters so that you have a functioning unit, so you don't have people overstepping each other and walking each other's toes because, oh my goodness, super strength. Well, that's Captain America's, you know, shtick. You know? Well, you got Captain America super strength and you got Hulk smash. There's a big difference between these two things, despite the fact that they're both strength based. You know, and I thought I liked that dynamic, and I wanted to kind of carry on my own idea of that in a more tactical and strategic setup with characters that actually can all work together in that scheme.
I always wondered, though, when it comes to the Justice League, who pays for the real estate and the taxes of the...
That is a good question. And that's actually, speaking of that, that's actually a very interesting question that's dealt with in Silver City, is who pays the bills? That has to, you know, when you deal with a character like Charlie, who has to be reclusive, he can't really work, he's an alcoholic, he doesn't have very many friends. Well, how does he have an apartment? That's a question I wanted to deal with. You know, how does he afford to eat? I wanted to deal with these things because those are things those are questions that you never think to ask really, unless you really kind of go, wait a minute. They have this massive space station out in orbit and they travel back, and who pays for all this? You know? And I wanted to kind of address that idea, and my solution to this was another character who actually is kind of the Nick Fury of the group. And I hate comparing this to the Avengers, but he doesn't work for a government program. He's kind of this business-minded individual who decides, I think I can help. So he ends up following Charlie home one day, and he tells him, he says, and like I said, this is kind of spoiler-free, but it's not big plot spoiler. He says, if I can find you, anyone can find you. He says, so we need to take care of that. And basically what he does is he's kind of a PR person. So he creates a PR campaign specifically for Charlie as Athena to up his image, or her image in this case, to up her image, and also at the same time to generate a charity fund which allows him to help Charlie get somewhere where he's secure and make sure that he has a place, make sure he has food on the table, that he's taken care of. Because you don't really get a salary for being a superhero. But I thought that was kind of a neat idea and a neat question to play around with too, that really weighs into a lot of the dynamics of the group when other heroes that crop up in Silver City start getting involved. Thought my cigarette went out.
I'm trying to think. I I can't wait to see the first book. I definitely want to see it. So that is through a Diamond distributor?
It is going to be coming out through Diamond, yes.
That's awesome.
I'm actually going to see what it's going to take because I'm talking to Netherworld about it, because Netherworld's the one handling getting everything through Diamond. I'm going to see what it'll take, instead of to get just a line listing, to also get a page ad, because that's where a lot of this is at, is the visuals is what sells a comic. And if, your distributors are looking through Diamond and they're just staring at listings, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking at what, who put up, had the faith in their product to put, a little bit of money down and put, get picture ads, buy that out, on top of the stuff that regularly sells. But we should also have direct sales through the website.
Through Netherworld's website or Diamond?
Yes, Netherworld's.
Netherworld's, okay. What about convention-wise? Are you going to get like the tour going type deal? You going to head up Toronto way?
We are talking about, I know, collectively, I may not be present for some of this, but I know Netherworld is wanting to start making full convention runs next year, because my book is not the only book they're doing. They've got about 5 or 6 other titles that I am immediately aware of, that I can think of off the top of my head, that they go around and promote too. And they're talking about doing C2E2 again next year. But they're talking about doing a whole run, which is going to be like MegaCon in Florida, and working their way up and out. I don't know how far north they're going to go. So it'll be kind of we'll have to see what's going on there. And I do my own independent con runs too. And I've actually got 4 more cons that I'm doing this year.
Which one?
And I will be at Fandom Fest in Louisville in 2 weeks. Though I'm mostly going kind of as a con goer for that one, just because of the mass of people that are there. This sounds silly for me to duck into this territory, but I'm going to Meffet Fur Meet in Olive Branch, Mississippi at the end of August. And then I will be at MCFC, which is Memphis Comic and Fantasy, in November, and GMX also in November.
Cool. Good stuff. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you want to touch upon for the watchers and listeners of the show?
Well, you mentioned briefly the Lavenders, and this is something that actually it overlaps with my work in Mysteries of Arcana a little bit, because I was actually working on both projects simultaneously at one point. Which was kind of an interesting thing, because I was producing 4 pages of colored comic a week on top of a regular job, which was kind of a strain. And when I parted ways with Mystery Arcana, I went into doing the Lavenders kind of full gear, and we reached a point to where it kind of petered off around May of 2012. A lot of that had to do with financial concerns. We are looking to resume that either at the end of this year or the very early start of next year. And and you said you actually stumbled across it. It's actually it's a futuristic detective noir comic that deals with vampires and werewolves and espers. That was the idea behind it. And I really dug the idea. And we're looking to continue that, and it will continue on through the remainder of what we call Book 1, which is another 60 or 70 pages. Okay. And then we're already scripting a Book 2, which moves things from just the focus, like of the Lavenders, is the Lavender family, which is Rose, who is the detective, her daughter Darlene, and her sister, whose name escapes me at the moment. I need to go back and sit down and eyeball all these things again. But anyway, it moves from a smaller scale, murder investigation, which is where things are going right now, as we're dealing with someone who's killing vampires, to a very large issue, because the sister, whose name escapes me at the moment, is actually a U.S. Marshal. And when we get into Book 2, it's going to be dealing with a larger scope that she's dealing with, and we'll be introducing some more elements of supernatural beyond the vampires and werewolves idea. I can't say much more than that about that, though.
That's okay. It's good stuff. Well, Keith, as always, it's a pleasure talking with you. We got to do this a little more often than every 5 days or so.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for taking the time to talk about Silver City. I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen with yourself and it in the future. And hopefully I'll see the book at the next C2E2 when it comes around, and if I'm right there again. So
Well, it's been fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to the book coming out.
Finally, I have something in my hands.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Well, that ends this episode of TGT Media. Of course, that's episode 316. We have a lot of other episodes coming out later this month, as well as August's coming out. We have a few more interviews. Then hopefully, if everything goes right, we'll be at Fan Expo doing the documentary as well as the usual interviews as well. But that also means that August coming up is the 5th anniversary of TGT Media, which of course means the TGT tournament, which is episode 201 to 200 and something or other. It's like actually, it's supposed to be the 50 episodes, and I did a lot of other video work of Ask the Butcher, so they're not technically TGT interviews. So it's episode 201 to like 272 or something like that, but that span actually is 50 episodes. So there's going to be a random draw that I'll probably do a video post of, and to show you that this is how we do things. And then, start the pre-voting aspect and everything like that when August 8th rolls around, or August 1st we'll probably do this, and we'll get the tournament going. A Little Person Among Media Giants documentary, of course, is going to be filming at Fan Expo Canada this August. If you see me there, wave. You may get in the B-roll footage. And then, in about 2 years' time, roughly, we'll get the actual documentary out to the festivals. So, thanks everyone that's watching this and listening to this, and tune in next week for another great interview.